to From the White Pill Box, the podcast where we stomp on statism and find the white pills along the road to a stateless society. I'm your host, Mark Maresca. I'm the author of the Substack articles of the same name, From the White Pill Box, content specifically for the already red-pilled, libertarians, voluntarists, anarchists, people who've overcome the myth of statism or are close to it. It's easy for us to be black-pilled, to believe evil will win. That's where the white pill box comes in. There are real-world reasons to have hope. Let's get going. Greetings all. Thank you so much for listening today. In this episode, I'd like to drill down to the very root of the state. We're going to discuss the myth that lies behind the state, the myth that underpins it. It'll be a perspective on the state that you may not have heard or maybe haven't pondered much, and I hope it gives you some real food for thought. This will be about what we call the myth of authority. This is the belief that the state is legitimate, that a ruling class of certain people have moral authority over the rest of us. I'll be diving deeply into this, and fair warning, you may also feel challenged. I plan to drive right to the heart of libertarian strategy. I'm not going to be kind necessarily, just letting you know. Now, on the topic of the myth of state authority, I don't find much literature. The main two works I've found on it I'll link to. I've drawn some of what I'll be covering from there, though not all. With so much material, I want to spend this episode laying the groundwork, examining the root of the state. From there, a lot of related topics ripple out, including, of course, white pills. So, I'll make the next couple of installments into parts 2, 3, etc. as needed. So, for today, we'll cover two main topics, the myth of authority itself, and exactly why I consider this a key aspect of the progression toward a free society. I'll start with the second of the two, the progress of the liberty movement over the last 50 years. Okay, let's admit, that's a hell of a long time, 50 years. And let's be honest, the progress has been meager. Most people don't even know what libertarianism or voluntarism is. People still hear anarchy and only think it means lawlessness and chaos. I'm being honest here. If that's where we are after 50 years, that sounds to me like, I'm sorry, an epic fail. To see this, let's contrast our movement with the anti-slavery movement. Let's think back to about the 1820s, when the abolition of slavery just started getting discussed. Along with that, we'll look to about the 1970s, when libertarianism really got off the ground. In particular, what started to get discussed seriously was a stateless society, the elimination of government altogether. So, in the 1820s, the legitimacy of slavery was being questioned. In the 1970s, the legitimacy of government was being questioned. With both slavery and government, we have the similarity of entrenched bad institutions going back forever. The long and short of it, in the 1820s, slavery starts being questioned. What happens? In about 40 years, it's gone, dead. In the 1970s, government starts being questioned. What happens? Well, 50 years and counting, it's as entrenched as ever. What did abolition do right? What could libertarianism have done better? Well, it seems clear what abolition did right. It identified the root of the problem, that slavery is morally wrong. Abolitionists kept the message moral and simple. It's wrong to own others. Every person should be free. Simple. The abolitionist, right from the start, struck at that root, relentlessly and continually. When the defenders of slavery chimed in, they usually used practical objections. I mean, that's all they could come up with. It was really hard to debate against the moral argument. The practical arguments were often economic, like how would the cotton get picked? The abolitionists were smart. They stuck to the moral point to make sure the public knew morality was at the core. But they also did their homework and had good answers to those pragmatic objections. But, as you know, the abolitionists were not really trying to come up with more efficient ways of picking cotton. Their practical points were more for psychological reasons, to make their unfamiliar ideas of freedom more palatable. See, slavery was deeply entrenched, and people needed to be eased out of the discomfort of having their presuppositions challenged. But the abolitionists did not hang their hats on the practical arguments. They used them only as a selling point to get the public mentally comfortable with the moral arguments. My key point is that their bedrock arguments were moral. They knew that's what struck at the root. They always came back to them even if they had to offer practical arguments. You can't argue with success. 40 years in, and slavery was dead. They did something right. Now, jump to libertarianism, the goal being the abolition, so to speak, of the state. And here, 50 years in, we don't have much to show for it, except maybe a lot of frustration. I believe our misstep was and is this. We do not drill sufficiently to the root cause. We haven't been striking at the root. Now, there is this fair point. Slavery is a clear and identifiable offense. It claims one man can own another. It's easy to get your head around. The state, on the other hand, is a complex mess. Exactly how it operates to hurt society is hard to see, hard to explain. I don't have to tell you. That's why it's harder to identify its root cause. And that's where we misstepped. Early on, they didn't drill down to the root, which means for 50 years, the real root hasn't been the center of attack. We've been attacking symptoms. To be sure, we've been using both moral and practical argument. And yes, those moral arguments are very good, but they don't hit the true root. Plus, and this is just as bad, the practical arguments utterly dominate the discourse. The moral arguments, which ought to be front and center, are mostly obscured. So, all the elements we need are available. I'm not inventing anything new here. I am saying that we've overlooked some critically important tools and instead overused the less relevant tools. So, not surprising, we've had marginal success. Okay, so I believe the big missing piece in this movement is this: the critical importance of the myth of authority. Now, since the myth of authority itself is poorly understood, I need to take that apart for you. What is it? It's the unquestioned belief that a ruling class is legitimate, the notion that some men rightly have power over us, and that we're morally obligated to obey them. Now, newsflash, this myth is false in several ways, depending on how the term is used. Authority might mean pure, raw authority, like your direct control over a physical object. More often, it means moral authority, meaning the obligation to obey. Either way, it's false. So let's start with raw authority, then I'll get to moral authority. No one can have direct authority over anybody else. This is because of free will, something in our nature as humans. Now, yes, I know there are debates whether free will is real or an illusion. That doesn't matter to this discussion. Even if it is an illusion, in the real world, everything works as if we have free will. No one can actually predict what others will do, period. So even if all our actions are predetermined, it doesn't matter. Our actions are unpredictable to each other. So with free will, we choose our actions from the moment we get self-aware, when we're toddlers. Hand a toy to a toddler. Whether he takes it, or ignores it, or turns his head, whatever, that's the toddler making a free choice. No one has mental authority over toddler. Whatever the child is deciding to do, he's doing that. You're not in his head doing his choosing for him. Then children mature. But it's no different. And all through our lives, no different. We're always, by our nature, making our own choices. Notice what we can't do. Physically get into the brain of someone else and control their actions. There's no one out there somehow operating or steering us from in our heads. Others can want us to act a certain way, even manipulate us, even threaten us. But the one thing they can't do is make our decision from inside our head. Only we individually have that control, that authority. Well, sorry, that includes rulers employed by the state. They physically can't do it either. You see it? Direct authority over others is impossible. Notice how it's the exact opposite with physical objects. I have control over that hammer. That's direct authority. I make it hit the nail. It has no say in the matter precisely because objects are not employing free will. But not with people. People don't just sit there hypnotically staring into space waiting for us to give orders that they blindly obey. Have you ever encountered anyone like that, utterly absent a will? No, that's not our nature. Even a weak-willed, easily manipulated person, they're not like that staring zombie. They're still the one making the inside-the-skull choice. So let's be clear about the state. With any of their rules and laws, if you comply, it's you complying. If you don't, it's you not complying. Either way, it's you deciding. So, to say the state has authority, at least direct authority, is meaningless. They're not in your head. They're powerless to literally control your mind. So, anyone who may think of state authority as direct raw authority is thinking falsely. That brings us to moral authority. What does that mean? The state knows full well that the rulers in government don't have that raw, direct control over us. What they do say is, when the government tells us to do something, we should do it. When the police officer says, "Step over here, ma'am," he's expecting her to move. He's not picking her up and placing her like an object. He's giving her an order. Giving an order or issuing a law or a regulation are all the same basic thing. They're commands telling you, do that or don't do that. And what that really means is, here's a command. You are expected to use your free will to obey it. That is, when you hear this command, do not process it as a choice. You are expected to obey it. The statist looks upon that situation and judges the outcome. And we're all trained that way. Check it out. If you follow the command, you've done right. If you disobey the command, you've done wrong. Right and wrong. You did a good thing if you obeyed. You did a bad thing if you disobeyed. That statist view brings morality into the choice. It says that the government agent's command is morally binding on you. You're a good person for obeying, a bad person for not. And that is indeed the myth of authority in a nutshell, the moral obligation to obey. Now, at this point, I want to stop and distinguish this form of authority from three other common uses of the word. One is authority over children. This is different because here we talk about the responsibility of a parent or guardian over a child with respect to other people, meaning of all the adults out there, who's responsible for this child? Oh, okay, that mom and dad over there. We'd say they have authority, meaning to the exclusion of everyone else. But that's not the meaning of government authority. Another use of the term applies to a representative. I might employ an authority in insurance, like an agent, or an authority in law, like a lawyer, to represent me somehow. Their expertise makes them, as we say, an authority on the subject. I would engage them for a specific, defined purpose. Another example would be a baseball coach as an authority over the team. He guides them how and when to train, etc. Again, though, that's not what we mean by government authority. Last, there's the authority structures of the military. Here we have a hierarchy where a higher rank issues orders to lower ranks. But this too is different, and in fact, this is more like that direct control type of authority. The command is expected to be followed pretty much robotically. They're expected to follow not because they're morally obligated, but because that's the rules of the game, so to speak. You're told to stand in formation. You're expected to comply, not because it's right or wrong, not for moral reasons, but because your role is to obey. Do it, or else get punished for not. Well, that last example cannot be what statists mean when they say we're obligated to follow the law, to obey the rulers of government. It isn't obedience based on do it or else. If they claim that, they'd be admitting there's no justification for authority other than because I said so. It's the reasoning of a thug or bully. They'd be claiming you need to follow the government's command because if you don't, they'll cage you or shoot you. How is that anything other than uncivilized brute force? Well, as libertarians, we know that is, in fact, what's behind government authority. But remember, it's the state's own justification for authority that we're talking about here. From their view, they're not justifying authority based on brute force. It's justified on moral grounds. You're obligated to obey because it's right and makes you good. Disobeying is wrong and makes you bad. So, here is how that claim, the myth of moral authority, gets demolished. It collapses every time the statist himself justifies it. He digs his own grave of contradictions. Now here's a list of 7 of them, and these help solidify how meaningless this myth is. Number 1, take the idea of right and wrong. We all know that it should apply to everyone the same, of course. But the right to rule would mean right and wrong applies differently to rulers than to the rest of us, because they can do things we can't. Tax, etc. Or law enforcers, they have special rights. But no, morality can't apply to some but not others. It's a contradiction. Number 2, notice laws differ from place to place. So would that mean morality differs from place to place? No way. That's a contradiction. Number 3, they say moral authority comes from the will of the majority? But wait, is it okay for a majority to have its way with a minority? Again, no. Might doesn't make right. A contradiction. Number 4, they use rituals to justify authority. Rituals like voting or the formal steps of passing legislation. But rituals can't alter morality. If you think that, then you have to think it was moral to have slavery. After all, it was legal, right? The Nazis exterminated millions of Jews legally. So automatically that made it moral? No way. A contradiction. Number 5, they claim authority comes from the people. But people don't have the right to force others. So how could people delegate that right to rulers? You can't delegate a right you don't have. You can't ask someone to do a bad thing for you because you don't have the right in the first place to do that bad thing. But that's what voting does. It tries to give power to politicians from humans who don't have the power in the first place. A contradiction. Number 6, suppose they make a law that would violate your own conscience, your morality. Suppose a law that lets the state do medical experimentation on your kids. The myth says you're morally obligated to obey, meaning you're morally obligated to act immorally. A contradiction. Number 7, finally, human free will puts the nail in the coffin. You make your choices, not the state. So take a bad law, like a law that lets the state do experiments on your kids. Who decides if that law should be broken? Hell, it's you, right? Well, that's you deciding. You judging the law as right or wrong. You are the gatekeeper. You outrank government authority, which makes it not authority at all. A contradiction. And even the very act of obedience shows the contradiction. Obeying is a choice by you, which makes you, not them, the authority. I know it seems I've beaten this to death, but this myth of authority is the key that unlocks the libertarian anarchist problem. It's the overlooked tool that wasn't at the centerpiece 50 years ago, the way the anti-slavery moral arguments were at the center during that movement. So now let me connect the myth and the state. The punchline right here. The myth of authority is the cause. The state is the effect. The myth assumes rulers of society are legitimate. It permits rulers. It wants rulers. Well, it shouldn't be shocking that those who want to rule us get to do it. It's my contention that it's only the myth that makes the state possible. The state couldn't get off the ground without it. The myth is the single necessary cause of the state. I want to show you how tightly coupled this cause and effect relationship is between the myth of authority and the state. I'll use this definition of the state for these purposes. The state is the embodiment of the myth of authority. The state is the embodiment of the myth of authority. Saying it's an embodiment helps us rise above all the details, all the state's outward characteristics as an institution or a ruling class, the Congress, the presidents, the Pentagon building, laws, history, territories, whatever. Sure, all these are aspects of the state, but as a whole, all of it rests on that myth. The state is the outcome, the effect of the myth. Now, I'll pause here to jump to an analogy. I'll use the harmless example of the myth of Santa Claus. If we ask what Santa is, we might say the jolly man with the white beard who brings presents to all the good children. Now, that particular definition works great for little children, but adults need a more objective, mature definition. At the root, whatever definition you pick, it must convey that Santa Claus is not real because, well, he isn't. If the definition leaves out that Santa isn't real, it's a poor definition. I checked the various online definitions for Santa. Sure enough, every single one of them used terms right there in the main sentence like legend, imaginary, folklore. They capture the essence of Santa Claus by emphasizing Santa is fictional. So for adults, Santa Claus is correctly a myth. But from the child's view, Santa is specifically not imaginary. The child believes in Santa Claus. He is real to the child, but only because the child's mind thinks it. Sure, in the real world, we see Santa things. Santa at the mall, storybooks, TV shows, toys. Those things exist in the real world. To the child, it's all a real part of their real belief. Santa is real, not mythical, even though that's only real in their minds. The belief in the myth makes it real to the kids. It's so strong that even a bad costume job makes no difference. Getting past the myth of Santa involves the mind. It gains clarity about reality. It focuses on hard facts. So now, when we see things out there, they have physical reality, but not myth reality. And that clarity is so strong that even the best costume job makes no difference. All the Santa things out there lose the aura of the fantastic, the myth part. Now, those things are simply normal things in the real world. The extra fantastical parts, those vanish. The things are still out there, but the myth disappears into nothing. Notice that what occurred as the child matured only needed to happen in their mind. In our heads, here's how it looks. For the kids, to sustain the myth, the belief alone is enough. That's because the belief in the myth fogs up the mind. Reality can't penetrate it, so nothing can shake it. For the older kid, to eliminate the myth, it's enough to get over the belief. Once you get past the belief, the fog is cleared. Perception is direct. Now, nothing can fog up your mind. Nothing can sustain the myth anymore. Now let's use that analogy to think about the state again. Like Santa, the essence of the state is captured in the definition I gave because it includes the myth that causes it. The state is the embodiment of the myth of authority. It doesn't matter that the majority of people would not accept that the idea of a myth is part of that definition. They're like the children believing in Santa. Their definition can't call it a myth because they believe in the reality of the myth. So now, back to cause and effect. To repeat, the cause is the belief in the myth of authority. That myth produces the effect, the state. Yes, I know a lot of other things contribute to the state's existence, but I want to drive this home. The root cause of the state is singular and unique. The state first needs one thing and only one thing, the belief in the moral obligation of obedience to rulers, a contradictory false belief. Santa needs the myth to be real to the kids. The state needs the myth to be real to the public. It's only from that point that the state can take form and persist. Because if the majority did not feel obligated to obey rulers, you could never accumulate enough resources to support a state. But they do believe it, so they comply with supporting it. And there, my friends, is the root of it. The belief is the cause, the state is the effect. Okay, I know I've thrown a lot at you today, but I'll stop here for now and wrap up. There's a whole lot more to say, and I'll do that in upcoming episodes. As a teaser, here's some of the areas I'd like to cover. The process of being red-pilled, meaning getting past the myth. What the myth does to the mind, how we think about people in the state, even how we think about ourselves relative to the state. Learning to use this insight to strategize, basically to, once and for all, strike at the root of statism. Also, a real black pill in this insight about the myth of authority. But some white pills as well, and awesome ones at that. Well, teasing you all with even more white pills is a decent way to conclude this installment. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Many thanks to Substack for hosting my podcast and my articles. And thanks especially to you for listening. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.